Kia ora, my name is Carolina and I'm going to present a set of studies that adopted the ecological approach to infant drowning prevention by investigating the impact of locomotor experience and swimming lessons on infants' avoidance of bodies of water. We know that babies are often at risk of falling into the water. In fact, most drowning incidents among young children occur due to falls into the water. But at some point, young children start recognizing and avoiding drop-offs. So when and why do they start perceiving the risks of falls? The ecological approach has been used to investigate the effect of perceptual motor development on infants' avoidance of drop-offs by testing infants' behavior on visual cliffs, gaps on the supporting surface, steep slopes, and real cliffs. The results show that soon after babies start crawling, they tend to cross the visual cliff, fall on gaps, and also down steep slopes. But after some weeks of crawling experience, they start beginning to recognize the risk and they start refusing to crawl over visual cliffs, gaps, and even real cliffs. We wanted to investigate the effect of perceptual motor development on infants' avoidance of bodies of water. So we created the Real Cliff Water Cliff paradigm. The Real Cliff Water Cliff apparatus is a platform that on one side is no protection from falling, the real cliff, and on the opposite side rests a tub filled with water, the water cliff. Babies were tested once on each side of the apparatus. They could freely explore the setup while looking for information to decide whether or not to go over the cliffs. The baby's safety was ensured by climbing equipment that limited the fall to a maximum of 5 centimeters. We tested 58 crawling babies. 36% of them fell on the real cliff, and 32% of them fell on the water cliff. But most crawling babies avoided the real cliff and the water cliff. The effect of crawling experience on infants' avoidance of real drop-offs was confirmed. We ran logistic regression models and we used the IKE method to analyze which variables would best predict babies' behavior. The model with total locomotor experience, in this case belly crawling and hands and knees crawling together, was the one that best predicted crawling infants' avoidance of the real cliff. And for the first time, crawling experience was linked to infants' avoidance of bodies of water. In fact, crawling experience was the best predictor of crawling infants' avoidance of the water cliff. We then tested walking infants. 36% fell on the real cliff and 34% fell on the water cliff. But most walking babies, like this little girl, avoided the fall on the real cliff and on the water cliff. There was no statistical influence of walking experience on walking infants' avoidance of both the real and the water cliff. Instead, the model including crawling experience and age was the one that best predicted walking infants' avoidance of the real cliff. On the water cliff, total locomotor experience was the best predictor of walking infants' avoidance. These results suggest that through crawling experience, babies learn to perceive affordance for locomotion and start avoiding drop-offs, filled with water or not. And importantly, this learning informs their behavior in the walking posture, a new finding that contradicts previous research. But what if the access to the water is not a sudden drop-off? What if the access to the water is smooth and gradual? Would locomotor experience inform infants' avoidance of the water as well? To answer this question, we created the water slope paradigm. The water slope is a 10-degree slope installed in a swimming flume at the University of Otago in New Zealand. The procedure was similar to the one used in the water cliff. But now, instead of the babies falling into the water, they could locomote down the slope into deep water. As soon as the baby's chin touched the water, I pulled them up and they had the opportunity to fly to their mothers a little bit. We tested 77 babies on the water slope. The babies were again free to explore the setup, and their safety was again ensured by climbing equipment. Contrarily to what happened on the water cliff, on the water slope most babies reached the submersion point, meaning the water touching their chin. Some locomoted to deep water, showing no concerns at all. Some took their time, but got to deep water anyway. Some fell in the water when it was shallow, and some fell when it was already too deep to turn around. Only 38% of the babies avoided the submersion point. Some simply never ventured into the water. Some did, but never got to submersion point. They simply stood there, playing with the water. The results show no influence of age or any type of locomotor experience on babies' behavior on the water slope, neither for crawlers nor for walkers. These results suggest that although locomotor experience has an important role in infants' avoidance of falling into the water, it has no influence on their perception of a body of water as a dangerous environment. Another important result was that babies reached the submersion point on the water slope more often than babies fell into the water on the water cliff. This result can be interpreted as showing that sloped accessways to deep water increases infants' risk of drowning incidents. But what would be the difference between the babies that avoided and those who did not avoid the submersion point on the water slope? Would baby swimming programs inform babies' behavior when a slope leads to deep water? On the water cliff, when comparing babies that had more than 10 swimming lessons with babies that had less than 10, there was a tendency of babies that had more than 10 lessons to avoid falling into the water, but the result was not statistically significant. When analyzing the effect of swimming lessons on infants' avoidance of submersion point on the water slope, there was a significant difference between babies that had more or fewer than 10 lessons, but this time on the opposite direction. On the water slope, babies with more than 10 swimming lessons reached the submersion point more than those who had less than 10 swimming lessons. These interesting results suggest that experiencing swimming lessons may increase the likelihood of babies entering the water when slopes are leading into deep water, and therefore increasing the risk of drowning incidents. After testing more than 200 babies on the water cliff and the water slope, our first and most important conclusion is that this new approach to infants drowning prevention, the ecological approach, is only in the beginning, and a lot remains to be investigated. For instance, we tested babies from Portugal on the water cliff and babies from New Zealand on the water slope. Is the bigger tendency of babies to engage in drowning incidents when slopes are offered to assess the water due only to different types of accessways, or are babies from New Zealand more risk-taken than babies from Portugal? Our next step to respond to this question is testing babies on both scenarios, the water cliff and the water slope. But now we are taking the tests out of the lab, into the real world. We are currently testing babies from New Zealand on a slope and a drop-off leading to water. Later, we will test babies in Portugal. And after that, there is still a lot to be investigated, because the contribution of the ecological approach to infants' relationship with aquatic environments and drowning prevention is only in the beginning.